Aaron will be joining us shortly when he arrives. He is en route right now. So I'd just like to welcome everybody to the Commercial and Social Justice Opportunities in California's Cannabis Market Seminar, hosted by Golden Gate University School of Business. My name is Dominic Rapoli, and I'm actually an alum here at GGU. I graduated law school and am a practicing cannabis attorney, and I will be moderating the event tonight. And I'll give a breakdown of what to expect. We're going to do introductions first. I have some questions lined up for the panelists, and then we're going to go ahead and let the audience go ahead and drive the discussion. Tonight's topic is about equity in the cannabis industry, this green rush that we are seeing with California, and quite frankly, the nation's laws in terms of states changing for medical and adult use commercial cannabis markets. And so equity essentially is supposed to be encompassing the idea where individuals who were targeted by the war on drugs, particularly minorities, people of color, poor people, would be essentially locked out of entering the cannabis market, but for provisions by local governments to leave access open to those who were targeted by the war on drugs to now profit in this growing, expanding cannabis industry. So I am going to then now pass the mic to our panelists, and I'd like each panelist to use 3-4 minutes to introduce yourself, who you are, because I feel you can do that a lot better than I can. So why don't we start there? Aaron?
Thanks, Dominic. Sorry, I'm pretty hot. Really appreciate you setting this up. My name is Aaron Flynn. I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And at the age of 18, I joined the Marine Corps in the year 2000. I did a tour in Iraq in 2003 and a tour in Afghanistan in 2004. And as I was really looking to exit the military, I found myself trying to, a bit disenfranchised with a lot of the things that I had done overseas, and just kind of the politics behind why my friends and I were risking our lives for what we started to for reasons that we started to disagree with. And so we wanted to get as far away from the military industrial complex as we possibly could. And so we landed in Humboldt County, of all places. And it was in Humboldt County where I really first discovered cannabis as a medicine. I was certainly suffering from symptoms of PTSD as well as some of my other fellow Marines that we moved out there with, and in an effort to make sure there are not another generation of Vietnam veterans on the streets really struggling and self-medicating, the VA does a lot of things. They give you counseling, they offer services, but they also push pretty hardcore pharmaceutical drugs on you to really try to treat some of the symptoms of PTSD and what we went through in the service. And while those definitely treat some of the symptoms, they also kind of take your personality away, turn you into a bit of a zombie. And so landing in Humboldt County really gave us access to the best medicinal cannabis in the country, much less the world. And it really helped wean us off of a lot of what the VA had prescribed, and then the mentality of the people up in Humboldt County, and the lifestyle, and it all just really helped with healing coming out of the service and those situations that we had been in. And so that was my first real interaction with cannabis, and then cannabis went and did something else for me. While it was treating symptoms of PTSD and helping me reanimate into society, it gave me a job and a purpose. And I got into cultivating cannabis. both outdoor, greenhouse, indoor, pretty much every aspect. And, then took that and was in Humboldt for about 6 years, came down to San Francisco where there was a greater access to patients. There just aren't a lot of people up in Humboldt County, and we really wanted to produce medicine for patients and help folks the same way that cannabis had helped us. And so now I am a cultivator here in San Francisco, have been for the better part of 6 years, and am just really looking forward to the new era of cannabis, and really looking at how we can be as inclusive as possible. And speaking from a veteran's perspective, I know there are a lot of veterans who benefit from cannabis quite heavily, and I'm very hopeful that we can see a lot of veteran-owned businesses inside of the cannabis space. And kind of my pipe dream someday would be acres and acres of greenhouses run by veterans, producing medicine specifically for veterans. I guess I'll leave it there.
Aaron, thank you. And just to follow up real quickly, Aaron, are you participating politically and organized at all?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I also run the San Francisco chapter of the California Growers Association and have done that for about 2 years now. Some friends of mine from up in Humboldt County in those days were the original founders of the California Growers Association, which is now a 1,300 member strong statewide group. And about 2 years ago, the CGA started chapterizing and recognizing that because cannabis licensing is a dual license structure, you need a state and a local license. And in order to obtain both of those licenses, the industry needs a seat at the table. We were able to accomplish that at the state level, and now locally, the San Francisco chapter of the California Growers Association, we're about 85 members strong now. It's producers primarily, although there are some retailers as well. We meet on a monthly basis, and it's really become an advocacy and trade organization for people who want to be involved in the cannabis business.
Great, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Valencia, and I'm mostly involved with this topic because I'm the author of Equitable Cannabis Policy, which is a report that I completed as part of my master's thesis at UC Berkeley, as part of the Master's City Planning Program and in partnership with the Greenlining Institute. My background, though, is actually in architecture and affordable housing. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, which was a community directly affected by white flight, which drove me to become really curious about affordable housing and the racial wealth gap that was caused by the generational effects of redlining. And through planning, while I was doing that research, I then came across this topic of cannabis equity. And I realized that there wasn't really a space carved out in academia for it. And it was emerging in Oakland, California. So I decided to embark on this research to formally document it under the University of California, Berkeley, and a respective organization like the Greenlining Institute. Since then, I have been involved in the efforts in LA and also San Francisco as part of the San Francisco Cannabis Working Group. And we played kind of a vital role in passing the most current version of the equity permit program there.
Great, thank you. Amber?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amber Center. I am the CEO of Leisure Life and California Rolls. We're a lifestyle brand that makes infused products here in the Bay Area, in Oakland specifically. I'm a former COO of Magnolia Wellness, which is a dispensary in West Oakland. So I oversaw all operations in a dispensary for about 15 months. I'm also the executive director and co-founder of Supernova Women, which is an organization of women that helps to empower people of color to become self-sufficient shareholders in the cannabis industry. So we do that through a number of ways, through networking, through education and also advocacy, advocating for people of color and lowering the barrier of entry to obtain some of this licensing across the country. And so I'm also a veteran. I'm a veteran of the United States Coast Guard, and I suffer from lupus, so I'm a medical patient as well. And I've also I've applied for a dispensary permit in Oakland with an equity partner. So I'm also got some experience being part of the equity program in Oakland, and yeah, that's about it.
Excellent. Nina?
My name is Nina Parks. I am a San Francisco native. Went to public school out here in San Francisco, got kicked out of public school out here in San Francisco, and eventually found myself doing quite a bit of youth work and community advocacy work in the Mission District. But found my way into the cannabis industry because my brother was arrested and sentenced to a year at Rikers Island. During his time there, he already had a plan to roll out a business called Mirage Medicinal, which turned into a delivery service. We are now transitioning it into a dispensary. During the time of me trying to figure out how to run the business, and as well as how to figure out how my brother was going to come back and own his business, I helped to co-found Supernova Women with Amber. So we started finding resources for business owners based on like what the needs were as entrepreneurs, and the gaps that we felt were like around understanding licensing and all these other things. And I'm also on the board of CGA with Aaron Flynn as well, and a part of the Cannabis Equity Working Group here in San Francisco in trying to even build the pathway of equity programming for people that have stories like my brother's. Also, like I said, we went to public school in San Francisco, and there's a very clear school to prison pipeline that we are trying to address on a greater level as well, which we had a win during the creation of the equity program here in San Francisco, to have one of the criteria if you went to a public school in San Francisco to specifically address that issue. So my work in the cannabis industry is on many different levels. I also run a yoga program, cannabis yoga program, where we are still looking at cannabis as a sacred plant. And then, of course, because there is an intersection with social justice and an intersection with economics and business, I kind of bleed over all of those lines.
Hello, my name is Brandon Brown. Originally from Chico, California. I came to San Francisco after working with a friend of mine in Prague for about 3 years, running a tourism, like an umbrella tourism company, pub crawls, walking tours, bike tours, beer tastings, and so on. So yeah, I moved to San Francisco to grow up a little bit, I guess. And I worked at Bowers for a period of time. And while I was working at Bowers Transportation, I had a couple of clients that had sedan companies that I would book stuff with, and they'd work for me on the occasion. And this particular guy brought me into Ease. I met Keith McCarty years ago, and they needed a transportation guy to help build the company. So I committed to that. We had the first contract. I'm technically the co-founder and original COO of Ease. Ran it out of my studio apartment for the first 3 months of its existence. Got kind of screwed out of that deal. But then I built Easy Meds with a group, moved on to become CEO of Quill for about a year and a half. We took over the Bernal Heights Collective and dealt with the whole kind of harvest takeover buyout situation. We had to move. I don't know if you guys heard about Bernal Heights moving into the Highbridge Arms, which was the last gun shop that got shut down a couple years ago. So we were successfully moved it over there, but weren't allowed to open. And then I ended up creating highbridgedelivery.com and tried to sell it to my partners. They didn't really like that, so we broke off, and they ran they ran with Quill, and I ran with Hybrids Delivery. I found new investors. Now I own hybridsdelivery.com, which is its own tech company, CDXX LLC, which is hopefully going to be an equity applicant micro business, and then Pharmacon LLC, which is a retail, hopefully adult use equity incubator that exists in Bayview. So right now in that space, we actually have, for our community engagement, we have a art gallery called My Art Gallery, which has it's displaying through the West Point project funded by the city, a bunch of community art and paintings, kids as well as well-known artists in the community. So we're trying to activate that space and kind of through the equity program, kind of I don't know, set the example of what you can do with these empty spaces while they wait for a license. And as far as the politics side, I was on the Human Rights Equity Working Group. A few people on the panel here. I'm a co-founder of the San Francisco Cannabis Retailers Alliance, which is a new retailers alliance consisting of pipeline applicants, people that were submitted during this period of time, kind of limbo, and then some existing dispensaries. What else? And yeah, that's it. That's how I got to be sitting here.
Thank you, Brendan. This panel is incredibly diverse in its reflection of the cannabis industry. And even though the cannabis industry is much more broader than this panel can currently represent. So what we'll be doing now is I have some questions that I have given to the panel to think about. And when I ask the question, I don't think we'll go in sequential order. We can just go when whoever has their thought ready to go, and we'll approach it that way. I want to hear everyone's thought on the question, but we don't need to go in order like we did. So this question is really geared toward the individual, the cannabis business owners. And so, Leslie, I kind of want to get just maybe you can have thoughts on people you've worked with or things you've read about to address this question. And basically, what I would like to know is for this panel to just have describe to me one or two successes that they've had in their cannabis journey that has helped them, and what were the takeaways from those successes. So whenever you get your thoughts, please. No, not just in terms of equity, but just in terms of you entering the cannabis industry and owning your own business and in that paradigm. Mm-hmm. Please, Amber.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, so one of the first things I did when I got into cannabis was I found a mentor, and that was really, really important. I found someone that could just teach me a lot that I didn't know about, really cannabis-wise. So my first boss was my mentor, and he was a really big figure in the industry. His name's Mickey Martin. He recently passed away. But I moved here to California from Chicago 4 years ago, and I knew no one. I moved here because I was sick. I was kind of like a downward spiral, suffering from lupus, and I didn't really have much of a choice. I had to get out of Chicago. It was too cold. So I moved here very sick, not knowing anyone, and he introduced me to everyone. So that was huge. And then my current business partner is a Wall Street investment banker type. He's a POC, but he really knows his numbers, and he's my numbers guy. Where I'm weak. So, I've got a really strong marketing background. I know how to manage people very well, but as far as the numbers and the finances go, I know some of the numbers because I have to, but I can't necessarily digest all the information, especially with these tax laws and 280E and all this kind of crazy stuff that we have to deal with in cannabis. So I had to find an expert, and find someone that was strong where I was weak. So I would say one of the successes for me in cannabis has been networking and finding people that really complement me and I complement them. So make sure you find a great mentor, and and when selecting a business partner, find someone that you're obviously very compatible with, but also that's someone that's strong where you're weak.
Well said. Yeah, I mean, I can echo that sentiment for sure. One of my first successes again was just finding an opportunity in cannabis, not just to use it as a patient, but to turn it into a career. And I've found that being really passionate and having that personal experience over the years has given me a little bit of a competitive advantage, in just the sense that we do have a lot of people coming into the industry now who are from different backgrounds, and we need that. We have people coming in from retail and finance and other backgrounds to really refine the industry, and that's essential. But having that personal experience and having that particular love, whether it's something that you had happen to you yourself, or a family member, something, finding that tie to the cannabis industry that gives you the passion to really move forward with your business is key. But I'll really echo that sentiment. For years, I had partners as a cultivator who we were all just good cultivators, and that was something that was really important in the early industry, because we were working with outdoor and greenhouse, and we needed 2 or 3 guys who really understood, or people, rather, sorry, who really understood cultivation and could get that done. But as we're transitioning now, and over the last 4 or 5 years, we don't need multiple cultivators in our business. We need one cultivator who's the head cultivator, and then we need somebody who understands finance, and somebody who understands investment, and somebody who understands marketing. And recently, I merged my cultivation business with another business, and we created Gold Seal San Francisco. And my partner is not a cultivator at all. He's a great salesman, and he has a great vision for what branding and building a cannabis business and centered around flower could look like. And so that partnership was huge. And then we partnered with recently with somebody else who's a great manufacturer. And so the business is really starting to round itself out, as instead of having a bunch of people who all have the same core competency, really finding people who can all fit those different aspects that are crucial to moving forward. And this industry for a long time has been kind of one-dimensional, and now for the first time it's really starting to emerge, and you need people who are good at the finance side and good at the marketing and the branding side, which you've never needed before.
I have to say, one of my biggest successes was like the first week I rolled out Mirage Medicinal as a delivery. And like I got patients that week that ordered for me again that week. And I was like, oh, they like me. So I think, like it was a moment where I realized that my relationship with the consumer and my relationship with the patient, my ability to deliver to them information that they trusted, was the greatest success, to make sure that we can even still survive or have people that be willing to cheer us on in having a dispensary. It builds a very organic base. They pulled in, yes, because the marketing and like the branding itself looks cohesive, and it's something that they can see it like works for their lifestyle. But more than anything, they have a relationship with us. They have a relationship with our drivers, and they know that they can call us, and they'll get the same treatment. We'll remember what it is that they like, and we'll continue to build with them as a person. So even as a business owner, just remembering that everybody is a person, it was like a very beautiful thing, because like a lot of other retail businesses I've been in, it's like the humanity is like sucked out of it, whereas because cannabis is a plant that's based in holistic health, that there was that aspect and that relationship that we can build with the people. So I think for me, that was like a huge success to know that they would keep coming back and ordering from me. It was nice. However, you did have those people that were on like weed maps that would just look for the deals and then you'll never see them again. And that always felt sad. I was like, I feel like they used me. But and another great success was like teaming up with people like Amber and like the rest of our co-founders, like finding your tribe, I think is super important, especially in especially in a industry that is not at all established. You know, like it's the only thing that was solid because the regs were changing every day. They're still changing every day. So the only thing that we have to like hold on to is the other people that are like, you see this shit changing every day? At least we're the same. We're consistent every day. So yeah, finding the tribe and then also building the relationship with the consumer. They were my biggest successes.
Well, I'd say probably my biggest success recently was finding my investors on Craigslist. I thought that was pretty interesting. But to back up people on the panel, strategic partnerships are extremely important, and who you bring in on your team initially is something you should think very deeply about. So not to say that my existing partners it's just they're not as familiar with cannabis as what I'd like, so I have to explain a little bit more, and it's a little bit harder. Things take a little bit longer, and so as a success, but also just as some advice along with what they're saying, it's good to find partners that your skills don't overlap. Because in other businesses that I had where the skills overlapped, you can start butting heads on issues. And so the strategic partnerships, especially initially where you have your kind of core group tribe, if you will, those people, it's best to make sure that everyone has kind of their job. And it overlaps in some small piece where it benefits, and so that's just a little advice on that side. And also the branding piece that was brought up too is that's a key factor in my opinion, because I've been on Weed Maps forever and they just started doing brands, and that's I think the best way to get in early is to start building your brand, your cannabis brand, and start figuring out what that brand is. And that's the best way in right now, because it's still so new, so there's not a lot of brands out there yet, but there will be. But if you get a good idea, you start buying up .coms and stuff like that around that, you could really, that would be a entry level way in for a lot of people that are just trying to figure out a way. And then CGA at Meadow is another place where I think a lot of people that are on the entry level, it's a great place to kind of come get some initial information so you can start meeting people in that sense and start to build your tribe. Because like you said, a lot of different types of people, like I'm a retailer, I go to those CGA meetings. The grower stuff doesn't necessarily affect what I'm doing because I'm a retailer, but it's good to support my growers because that's the relationship. Once again, not just the patient's relationship, but also your vendors. There's a whole list of people you're going to have to work with and build relationships with in order for your business to do well operationally. And so as another piece of advice, if you're looking to get into the cannabis industry and you're looking to network, events at Meadow and CGA events are something that, if you wanted to get entry-level information and start meeting people, those are good events to attend. But yeah, I mean, it changes every day. So when he said success, that's why we all kind of like, because we're all still kind of, a lot of us are a work of progress right now. Yeah. So.
Okay. So I would say that I'm probably at a point where I'm just recognizing my space in the cannabis industry and the role that I can play. When I first started this research in August of 2016, the idea of combining cannabis and academia, the two things that I was probably the most passionate about, seemed impossible. And people at UC Berkeley can be really critical, so I really kind of have had to advocate for myself, and that's why I partnered up with the Green Lining Institute to add legitimacy to this topic. So now I'm finally working on something called cannabisequity.org, which will hopefully be launching this spring, and I'm partnering up with other researchers to kind of create like an academic research online hub that also includes policy toolkits for regulators to be able to use. And I hope to be able to then partner with universities and continue to influence this to become, a topic in academia that is being discussed in research, because as we all know, public policy is often influenced by academic research. And through that, I am still now, the more that I get comfortable, getting rid of my own internalized stigma that I picked up just for being a woman of color, that had to live through the war on drugs or experience family members live through the war on drugs. I'm getting more and more excited about the possibilities. So I hope to be able to also complete my brand Yerba Crown, which is like an herbalist brand that includes cannabis, and it's all about health, wealth, and community building. And one of the things that I'm also really passionate about is alternate forms of housing and ownership. So that's like cooperatives and intentional communities. And, the more that regulations pass, the more it does seem like it could be a possibility to embark on something like that in the future. And that's kind of where my long-term dreams are, and where I hope the industry will be able to take us. And then, of course, careers that are now opening up and planning at the local and state level is also really, really, really exciting.
Great, thank you.
I just want to throw in there real quick. I forgot to say the equity program. I'm pretty excited. I don't think anybody said that. Well, we have an equity program now, so that's exciting.
Great point, Brennan. I want the panel to address now the $1 million question, right? So, what is equity? What is equity in the cannabis industry, and is there a definition for equity?
Leslie, go
Please,
first.
yeah, whoever has their
Leslie, go
thoughts.
first, and then I'll go.
Yeah, I can speak to that from an academic perspective, because it's the first thing that I had to kind of encounter when starting this research. I had to define equitable cannabis policy, right? What is equitable cannabis policy? Nobody's researched it before. There is no existing definition, so I had to create one. And a lot of the philosophy in all of the programs, like the one that Oakland used, is based on this image that is really popular, where there's a tall person, a medium-sized person, and a short person that all get the same box and are trying to watch a ball game, and there's a fence on their way, and the short person cannot see anything. And that is what would define equality, right? Everyone gets the same thing. Everyone gets the box. Where equity is about access. It's about all three of them being able to watch the ball game. And the tall person doesn't need a box and gives their box to the short person, and then all three are able to watch the ball game. That's considered equity. In the cannabis industry, the boxes really are representative of the landscape, the effects that the war on drugs have had on people of color. Obviously, if we're both in the same race, to get to the economic benefits of the cannabis industry, and you got arrested on the way and did some time, you're obviously going to be behind and are not going to have the same access to the industry or the same opportunities. So it's really about access, and the definition that I used was the Green Lining Institute definition for racial equity, which is having success if your race or ethnicity was no longer a factor in that. And so the definition that we created for equitable cannabis policy is giving people of color access to the economic benefits of the cannabis industry. And Oakland, LA, and San Francisco have adopted very similar definitions that also include decreasing disparities and highlight the importance of ownership and employment as well.
was really good.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's nothing to
that,
add.
that's the best I've ever heard.
Yeah, that was amazing. So succinct. I love it. Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, and so
Mic
is that,
drop.
I mean, the panel's done discussing that?
Well,
Wow.
I
All
mean,
right.
yeah, it was
I mean,
the
this
war on
is-
drugs, pretty much. It's the brief, like, helping people that lost out on the war on drugs. It's like a perfect example is your brother. And now I think that the main thing with the equity program is the fact that in Oakland and San Francisco, those are the only two places currently in the United States where a felon can own a business. So, LA now too. So those are 3 cities in the entirety of the United States.
in fact, you get sent to the front of the line if you're.
Yeah, and so that
Fun is that a good?
that's huge for the people of color. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Can you say the second part of that question? No. Can you,
question.
great. So what is the equity, and then what was it?
I just have here, what is the definition? Yeah. No, you have something to say, Aaron?
I'll just say that I guess probably a very small component of this conversation comes down to people who had their lives affected by the war on drugs. And coming from the veterans aspect, and this is something that isn't as widely publicized, the military has very strict policies about drug use, and cannabis use is lumped into. And there are, again, this is a small segment, but there are former members of the military who, for whatever reason, used cannabis while they were in service, and it was medicinally, like myself and a lot of service members that I knew used it, and they received a bad conduct or a dishonorable discharge from the military because of that use of cannabis specifically. And now they are essentially, in layperson's terms, a dishonorable discharge from the military strips you of your benefits. You don't get any of the time served in. You don't get any of the military benefits that anyone else. You can't vote. You can't own a gun. You really do get treated almost like a felon. It's way worse than if you had never joined. And so there are a small segment of veterans out there who have had their lives because of unfair cannabis. And so I'm hopeful that that small segment.
Aaron, that brings us to our next question. And so you answered part of it. But for the whole panel, I'd like to think about who are the victims on the war on drugs. I think, Aaron, you would say that veterans to an extent.
So
And so why don't we have that on the table now? Who are the victims of the war on drugs?
Well, historically, when they started rolling out cannabis prohibition, like policies, right? It was mostly targeted towards Mexican immigrants, right? Because that's how we saw the language change from cannabis into marijuana. So if you see a lot of policy, it says marijuana, it does not say cannabis, and now they're switching it back. But it was very divisive because they were trying to create stricter immigration laws. And so in order to be able to do that, they needed to create like the boogeyman, essentially, right? To make it seem like they are protecting and serving this country in a way that, like, against people that are here to destroy it, right? So marijuana, as a term, was something to already make it sound more ethnic than it was. Because cannabis as a plant is something. Cannabis as a medicinal plant, as well as a cash crop, has been something that we've seen throughout world history. Like, people needed to cultivate hemp in order to have a navy, right? So people were actually asked to grow cannabis, and they could pay their taxes with cannabis in order to enhance military. Right, and when that no longer served people, because you saw things like the advent of nylon or others, like other like a cotton, like just other fibers, right? Then it behooved them to make it even more illegal, right? So you have people that had special interests like timber or, you know, like raw, like oil. And so they used their outlets like the newspaper, right, in order to be able to continue to demonize it. And who do they decide to demonize? They decided to demonize people of color, right, because it was their boogeyman. So you have early recordings of congressional tapes of our first drug czar of the United States, Harry Anslinger, saying that blacks, Latinos, Filipinos, and jazz musicians and entertainers, you know, like are trying to sleep with white women, and therefore we need this plant to be made into something illegal, right? And so the policy was based in racism. So in order to be able to make it equitable as we come into like a greater consciousness, is to actually go back and address the fact that the communities of color were specifically attacked, and that we have recordings that say that we are going to attack these communities using this policy. You know, so the victims of the drug war are specifically people of color communities that we need to fix.
Was it you, Leslie, that brought up that statistic when we were in the working group about it was, what was it, like 80% of the cannabis convictions were women?
Yeah, in San Francisco.
Yeah. Could you? Yeah. I mean, that was a really interesting. I feel like that was a really interesting statistic that people shared.
Yeah, I think that the data does really prove all the way from when it began down to 2016 that the war on drugs was a war on cannabis, which was a war on people of color. And in 2007, data by the ACLU around 2010 saw that half of people imprisoned for drug offenses were for cannabis, and more than half, and most of them were just for cannabis possession. And our prison system is mostly made up of people of color who have been arrested for drug offenses. That's literally kind of the majority of our prison system. Data from 2010 found that nationally, blacks were 3.7 times more likely to be arrested than whites for cannabis possession. And in California, twice more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession. Despite consuming cannabis at the same rate and often being a smaller portion of the population. And at the local level, that can sometimes be a little different, but most of what we've seen is that it's been more drastic. In Oakland, although blacks only make up 30% of the population, they've been 82% of arrests for cannabis, just for cannabis. 95% of all of those arrests are people of color. Whites only make up 5% of the arrests and are also 30% of the population in Oakland. In San Francisco, blacks only make up around 6 to 11% of the population, and they've been up to 19 times more likely to be arrested for a drug offense, not just cannabis. But as we said, the conversation around drug offenses is mostly a conversation around cannabis. And in San Francisco specifically, it was women of color, black women, who were the most affected. And there's still researchers trying to figure out why that is. There is no real data that gives a solid explanation, but the data is extremely disproportional in how it's affected black women.
Yeah, actually, when I heard that, and when we were in the equity working group, I was a little daunted by those facts, and I went into the baby community and I was asking around. I was telling people about the statistic, and I was like, how does this happen, right? And one of the community members tells me, well, all the men were in jail already. So a lot of what I was hearing is, and I hadn't thought about that, and that's something that's in the equity program, is that you have these men that were running these delivery services or these cannabis businesses, and then they get arrested for whatever, and then that was the cash cow for the family. So now the woman has to step up. Whoever's in the house has to step up and take over that business because that's the influx of money and have to keep that business running. And so now they're just kind of forced into this position to survive, in essence, and then end up getting arrested as well. And so that was, I think, in the equity program we added in there that also the people that had to put their house, on check to post bail, or so there's those little details were very interesting to hear about for me. Like, oh wow, I didn't really think about that part of it, that people basically went broke just trying to get their family members out of jail, as well as trying to take over these businesses that they probably weren't that familiar with and were more likely at that point to get caught as a result of that inexperience. And so that was just one interesting fact that was kind of a side note about who was affected by this war. And there's just a lot of little intricacies. There's a lot of people affected down the line that didn't even have to do with the actual selling of cannabis or different drugs.
I want to add too to Leslie's statistics. Every study that I've ever come across and read tells us that in any given community, everyone does drugs practically at the same rate in terms of ethnicity, meaning black people, white people, Hispanic, they all are consuming essentially drugs around the average same number. And so these statistics that Leslie told us reflect very discretionary arresting policies that, if looked at just by the numbers, reflect a racial bias. And I just wanted to add that to what Leslie was saying with the statistics. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the next question. What is the largest obstacle for the average victim from the war on drugs to enter the cannabis industry? Amber, go ahead.
I would say the largest obstacle by far is access to capital. I mean, everybody needs money. It takes money to make money. And it's really hard to do that when you're in the hole, starting from all kinds of fees or whatever it is that you've had to pay out, dealing with, getting caught with a gram of cannabis in Iowa. I had a couple of friends, a friend that just moved here to San Francisco 2 weeks ago. He got caught with 0.2 grams in Oklahoma on his way here and had to pay $3,300 to get out of jail. And he was driving across country. They found a roach in his car. So, and now he says with everything being all screwed up and him having to rearrange his whole trip and everything, it cost him about 10 grand instead of, what he had budgeted to move here. So it's costly when you get busted with cannabis in the wrong place. And it's really hard to crawl out of that hole. And most of us, like me, we do not come from generational wealth. I do not have wealthy grandparents. As a matter of fact, my grandfather had to drop out of grade school when he was in 4th grade to help his mother pick cotton. So I don't come from money. We don't come from money. So, we have hardworking parents that live paycheck to paycheck. So.
I agree that access to capital is definitely the largest barrier, I think, for anybody coming into the industry, much less somebody coming in from a background that doesn't have that level of support. I would also say, as a close second, if you've really been disenfranchised, or if you're one of these communities or a member of the community who has been thrown in jail or set behind, you haven't had the ability to and the time to build the skill set required in order to run one of these businesses. It's not like you just go down to Meadow and sign up for their platform and start selling cannabis right away. And that's from a retailer's perspective, but from the producer side, from the cultivators and the manufacturers, this is a skill that takes a solid 5 to 10 years to really develop and refine. And if you spent that time in jail or incarcerated or just behind the power curve in general, that skill set is not there for you. And so what I'm excited about inside of the equity conversation is not just the conversation around employment, but around entrepreneurial opportunities, but those come through training. You need the skill set. And the one thing that I hope there is an approach taken to equity that does not just thrust people who haven't had the appropriate amount of training and don't have the skill set into positions where they're now running a business too soon. And that's really something to consider. The margins are going to continue to shrink. When we look at black market businesses or unregulated businesses in this industry, people were recognizing 70, 80% of their gross margins. They kept almost all of the money because all they had to pay was rent and for some employees and for some materials. Now, yeah, utilities, that was it. And now with taxes and fees and W-2ing employees and everything that comes into running a cannabis business, businesses are going to recognize maybe 30, 35% of their gross margins if they're really good, if they're really efficient, if they have their skill set dialed over years of experience that is required. And the less experience that there is in a new cannabis business, the more those margins are going to shrink, and they're going to start to reach 20%, 15%, and to the point where it's not a viable model anymore. And so it's not just the access to capital is step one, and that's the hardest barrier. But the second barrier is access to the expertise and that knowledge, which takes years. And so many folks in the equity position are behind because, again, they've been incarcerated or they just didn't have the opportunity that other people did to dial that skill set in. And so conversations around mentorship, which I think was a great pointer, finding a good mentor, but bringing people on to get them trained and really dial in that skill set and have a structured approach to not just thrusting people out before they're ready. Because I do really have serious concern that if this moves too quickly, what's going to happen is folks are going to get put into positions where they don't have the skill set in order to succeed in the long term. And that's something that's really important to consider and think about. So training programs, mentorship, I think is a very important part of the conversation. You have to have the skills in order to succeed in this industry that's going to get more competitive than it ever has been.
And then I would like to add, as a third barrier to entry, is access to affordable legal advice. So that goes across all boards in regards to corporate structuring, trademarking, like any amount of around your taxes, any of that stuff, like being able to find a lawyer that you can afford and that's not going to just bleed your budget, is very difficult. And then even knowing what are the correct questions to ask this lawyer, because if you're going to pay $350 an hour and you're you only have enough money for 1 hour with this person, you don't want to spend 30 minutes trying to figure out what questions you're going to ask them anyways, because then you just wasted your time and their time. So access and knowing how to navigate just all the questions that we would need on a legal end has been difficult. We've been very, my brother and I have been very blessed though to be able to attend a lot of these CGA meetings and a lot of the other association meetings so that we can kind of figure out what the landscape is and try to get an idea and just be able to build relationships with people that are in that realm. But at the end of the day, when we actually need to get the work done, it is a huge barrier because our budget is limited.
Well, I would say, just to kind of, for the most part, piggybacking what everybody's saying, it's still federally illegal. So everyone that thinks that all this big money's coming in and you hear about people saying that's not necessarily true. It's still federally illegal, so the big investment is very difficult to get your hands on. it's still a very risky investment. So you have to have a legitimate business plan. You have to really sell people on this idea, and they have to really be committed to the idea. And then I would so that as far as financing, on top of just finding capital, it's very difficult to find the amount of capital necessary.
And then just to compound on what Brandon's saying, doing all this while being black,
Yeah.
I mean, asking for money for a weed business and you're black,
Yeah, simply said, like it says where it explains itself in that sense, that this is still very risky for a lot of investors, and it's a very difficult thing. And I would say that space is a huge barrier to entry. Finding a location in San Francisco specifically is very hard. You could have all the capital in the world, but if you don't have a compliant location and you haven't done your homework to figure out if it's compliant, I mean, I've been through the entire application process for a retail store, and basically going to be twice now. And planning and public health, to some degree, had no clue in certain aspects of the application process. So, as you in this industry, it's not even straightforward in the actual application process. So it even gets diluted there to where you have the capital and you have the know-how and you have a space, but then the people that are supposed to be telling you what to do don't really know what to do. So then you have that. And so it just to condense all the things we've been talking about.
Oh man, and then the fact that the building owners are like, oh, what, cannabis business? And then they apply their own green tax to you, and they're like 4 times as much as what market value is. And you're like, that doesn't even make sense. We're not, like, we have to pay taxes now. So that's an issue too.
Yeah, and keep in mind that, like Aaron was saying earlier, keep in mind from a retailer's perspective, it's 1.5x is kind of the standard markup in the cannabis industry, which is kind of nothing. And so usual retail is 8 to 10. You get into Gucci, I mean, they're like, 30x. I mean, it's much higher margins in regular retail businesses. In cannabis, a lot of people think there's all this money, but like he was saying earlier, that there's back then when you think about people that made a lot of money in cannabis, they didn't have to pay 2 sets of taxes. They didn't have W-2 employees that they had to pay taxes on. The
regulatory system is the worst middleman ever. They don't even drive your packs anywhere.
Regulatory fees can be really intense just applying for a license. For instance, Modesto, their manufacturing permit, just the application is $25,000. So these are real dollars,
without a guarantee. 25 grand, maybe you get. So, I mean, people are dropping $9 grand at public health right now, and they're literally telling people it's not a guarantee. Thank you for your money. So, this is the landscape in which you're trying to break in. There's
barriers everywhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of it's like running hurdles. It's pretty intense.
Amber,
But it's still fun.
Yeah. We still love what we do. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, we're grinding it out, but I still really enjoy it. It's a new industry too, so it's really exciting. So that's what drives at least me.
Amber, you mentioned the price tag for the licensing fee in Modesto for manufacturing. I think that's a reflection of the organization that probably doesn't exist in terms of a cannabis industry representation. I mean, that sounds like established businesses looking for a way to make sure that they're the only ones operating in that area.
For sure, and a few other, these applications can get really intense. I've been applying for different license types in different localities across Northern California the past 6 weeks. And it's really interesting to read some of these applications because you can tell who they're courting to come to operate in their locality and who they don't want in their locality. For instance, some of these questions are list the experience that you have operating a permitted retail facility. who has that experience besides people in the Bay? Harborside, the bigger players, they have the experience. Most people don't have this kind of experience. I got lucky. I have it. But most people don't, So it's like, that's a huge barrier of entry. You have to find someone to get on your team that actually has experience running not just a dispensary, one that's got a license. And at this stage right now, that's very, very few. So
What are they going to want?
exactly.
Amber, your first, I keep going back to you, Amber, you're really hitting the spot tonight. You mentioned your first answer to barriers was capital. And I think it's dead on. And I would like the panelists to do a side conversation briefly about capital and banking. Yeah, or I know, banking. And if you could briefly just mention some of those personal experiences with banking that you have with your cannabis business.
Sure. So banking has been interesting. I learned a lot operating a multi-million-dollar dispensary on how to have cash plus a bank account. An ATM is a fantastic way to get money into your account if you have a retail establishment. Because what it does is when people go and draw cash out of the ATM, you can deposit it back into your bank account. And maybe this bank account is for retail. And that's it. It's a retail bank account. The bank obviously cannot know that it's a cannabis bank account, although now we have to disclose, that we're doing, or we're supposed to, that we're doing cannabis yeah, operations. But banking is interesting, I have a bank account. We got lucky. We have a bank account. Some of the keys just don't put a lot of cash in, don't pull a lot of cash out. What we did is we used our bank account as a vehicle for investment. So all of our investors transferred money into that bank account, and then we just use that bank account for doing stuff like paying all these legal fees, and paying for these permitting fees and paying for our regulatory fees. But as far as our operating cash and capital goes, that's done in cash. We're not dipping in our bank account for that. So, I mean, it's tricky, it's a cash game. You make sure you have security, make sure you have safes, because you are going to be carrying cash.
Let's see. In the beginning, we did, yes, it is a cash business. So like there's a lot of security measures that you have to take, right? Not going to talk much more about that. But there was something in the beginning in trying to run credit cards, because I was like, I don't want my drivers dealing with any cash, because I don't want to have to resolve things with them at the end of the day, and I just didn't want them to be liable for anything. And then I wanted to have like record of what was given, just like of a business owner. So like you want to be able to have statistics on that. But the way that things are set up, they make it almost impossible for you to have that, Did something in the beginning called the square dance, where you would take a square and you would have to like run it around to different accounts, because like if you ran it too many times in like a week or whatever, they would get a little bit suspicious and start calling and being like, what's this? And so you just have to kind of like dance it around. Just a pain in the ass. As of right now, we have some hope, right, with a conversation from like John Chang, who's the current like California treasurer, where he has been holding a banking working group where it's like 20 some odd people from different departments trying to figure out some sort of solution. I know that at least in Colorado and Washington, they were able to establish credit unions, and that would be like such a wonderful way for California to also adopt their own banking, is because we can also keep it within our communities, right, through the credit union model. So we're hoping that more of the credit unions start to step up and decide to create establishments in California that would allow us to truly bank and have payroll and to do all of these things that we need to do as a regulated business at this point. But right now we don't have any solutions. So.
Well, I would back up Amber on the ATM idea. Doing delivery service, the delivery version of an ATM is called a cashless ATM. So it's a wireless ATM, pretty bulky, and that's like my life's blood for my company. It's actually currently not working. It's been really pissing me off, but it's exactly what she said, the ATM cash. So it goes straight into your account, but it looks like it's a withdrawal. And so that's, if you're going to take card, but that's only debit. So you could take credit card, but the application fees for credit card right now are out of control. Like they're crazy. And we're talking about taking huge percentages out of your profits there. And yeah, simple tip, don't deposit more than $10,000 in cash because that flags your account. So the cash, like she said, should be in flux and tracked, but you more than likely at this point want to keep majority of your cash out of your bank account, or just the amount that you're going to be writing checks for your staff, as a way if you wanted to track that. At least that's what we do. We don't keep any more amount of money in the account than we're paying out that week or the week before. Kind of a funny story. Well, not funny, not very funny for me, but interesting story. Let me say that. So there's these cards called NetSend cards and PayPal cards. They're actual debit cards that you can add credit onto. You can buy them on the dark web as well. Apparently you can get a $200 credit card for $50 on the dark web, right? And these actually have photos of these people, their name on it, and a PIN. So my first 2 weeks running hybrid delivery, I get a call from the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. And so as you can imagine, I was like a week and a half in, I'm like, they're like, don't worry. We're just calling about credit card fraud. Like, okay. And I'm totally down to cooperate, And so come to find out, these guys have been using these cards, loading them with stolen credit, and the merchant's account. So take the bank account out of the mix right now. Then you have to go for a Square account or a Stripe or any other online. Romit's another one that I used. That was like a Bitcoin kind of transfer, and they pivoted to a regular risky merchant. And the instant that you have if you're using credit card or debit with that merchant, the instant that you have a flagged credit, a fraudulent credit thing, or anybody tries to do a pushback on that account, that account's screwed. It's done. Like you have no. I mean, I actually won about 6 out of the 10 disputes that I went through over the next month that I had to deal with, and so that wasn't that much fun. But for the most part, that's it. I went through a Stripe account, a Romit account, 2 Square accounts, and then now we have the cashless ATM, which took like probably 3 months to get set up, and then yeah. So you could look at it. It's basically an ATM that's wireless. So if you have a storefront, obviously a regular ATM is the best. But if you're running delivery services, would be something that you could take card, but not have to run into is or at least expose what you're up to, unless you want to. So that's, I don't know, just it's extremely hard. I mean, my last little comment, which was kind of a funny conversation I had with my partners, because I was like, yeah, we create these companies and we have to have a couple bank accounts to burn. And they're like, what do you mean burn? Like, what does that mean? What do you mean burn bank accounts, Brandon? I was like, well, we may get bank accounts shut down. So we need to have multiple ones so we can keep operating. They're like, what? I was like, yeah, I know. Regular business, we wouldn't have this problem. But in cannabis, got to have a few backup bank accounts, as I'm sure everyone else here is familiar with. So that's just some of my experience. Thanks.
I'll just try to keep it brief. As Nina said, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Now that we have licenses and permits for the first time, and that's just starting to happen in San Francisco and Oakland, and folks are going to have state licenses. There are banks that will work with you if you can show that license. Now, the criteria for this banking relationship is really strict. And by entering into one of these relationships, you enter into a whole nother level of reporting that makes it a scary idea to get into, because you can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out with this type of banking relationship. If you do want to do this and you want to show your license to start one of these relationships, that bank actually has a level of federal reporting that they have to do. They scrutinize everything that you do under a microscope, and it's indicative of the fact that it's moving in the right direction. And if you are a totally above board, vertically integrated, dispensary producer, big company, maybe you would do this. Smaller companies entering into the space right now, I wouldn't recommend it, but at least that's starting to happen. But I'll be super candid and just share from the producer side what we've gone through in order to establish some level of banking, because we've had to. Landlords have started to not accept cash for leases anymore. Now that we have payroll, we have to find ways to put money into the bank to at least pay our people, pay our lease, and do a couple other things. And what we've done up till this point is we literally go and open 5 different bank accounts, and we open one with each of the big banks that are out there. And I won't name them. We all know who they are. And we do our best to not completely flat out lie. So we find analogous uses for what it is that we do. Perhaps I'm a non-retail nursery, or I'm a wholesale nursery, or I'm different things like that. And I go around and open up these different accounts. And then, as Brandon said, you never deposit more than $10,000. You make your banking look very just kind of benign and regular. You don't pay your power bill. There's all these red flags. And if you meet somebody who's been in the cannabis industry for 5 years and they've been banking this way, odds are they've had 3 or 4 bank accounts shut down. So what Brandon said about burned bank accounts, that's a straight up. Now, you don't lose the money. The bank just reaches out to you and says, I'm sorry, we think you're involved in cannabis. We can't, we're going to have to close this account. You get the money back. And this is the song and dance that we play right now. We have to put money in the bank because there are certain things that we can't pay for with cash. And so we have to be slightly disingenuous and essentially engage in collusion. And it's really a crazy place to be. Fortunately, the state recognizes that this is the position a lot of people are in, and so you don't see a lot of people actually getting prosecuted for this stuff, and they know that this is a problem that they have to fix, so they're working on it. And so from the production side, we don't care as much about merchant accounts. Credit cards don't matter to us because all of our transactions are business. And so we've basically been able to, slowly establish a relationship with a single bank, but for years we open multiple accounts at multiple banks, and we make sure that our deposits and check writing habits don't raise red flags, and you actually have to get pretty good at. Sorry, that's not the best advice in the world, but yeah. I'm just being totally frank. This is how we operate.
If we're talking about like social justice and cannabis and opportunity and business and all of those things, like you want to be a above board person, but literally the way that things are written out, they make you need to not be completely honest, and then they have the right to be like, you weren't being completely honest, you're a criminal, and you're like, what the you're talking about? Like, I was trying to do everything possible, but you totally told me that I couldn't do anything. This is the way that I can keep everybody safe in regards to not having all this cash laying around. Like, there's no solutions.
We're going to take questions from the audience at the end, and there will be plenty of time for that discussion. So, thank you. There's paper that you can, in the back, to write questions down, and if you need that.
I just want to add to that and raise some concerns. The reason is because it's federally illegal still, so banks are not willing to cooperate. And this raises a lot of concerns already because the lack of access to wealth for people of color is no coincidence, right? These convictions have really affected access to housing, employment, and public benefits. And it is no surprise that in Oakland, only 3% of white people are considered poor and 22% of blacks, when they're both 30% 80% of the population, and 82% of the Black population is being arrested. So that directly translates into poverty and unemployment rates. And we all know that the only way compound interest is one of the most powerful tools for creating wealth in this country. And if you are prohibiting people from being able to make any investments or enter any wealth building opportunities that use compound interest, by restricting it to being a cash only business, you are truly limiting the wealth and the access that, if we're speaking from an equitable perspective, that people of color can gain through this industry. So it's a really unique industry where it can create a lot of empowerment, but there's also a lot of limitations to it.
Thank you. I want to have some closing thoughts on that question. Like Leslie said, it's a pure federal issue. I've worked with a dispensary who had to go through 9 different bank accounts in a week just to keep the cash flowing. And it's just completely unsafe to have California's #1 cash crop have its entire industry work in cash without traditional banking institutions. And that's the current state of the cannabis industry. So let's move on to the next question, and it's a shift from what we've been talking about. But it has to deal with equity and the people who would qualify as equity applicants. How do people with criminal records enter the cannabis industry? And let's address nonviolent cannabis offenses, nonviolent drug offenses, and then other criminal convictions. Thoughts?
How would they enter in?
Yes, yes, and people with criminal convictions, how will they enter?
Okay. So for San Francisco, well, we'll start in like the succession of the different programs that were created. So Oakland created the equity program. They were the first ones to really lay down a framework. And for them, they were addressing all the criminal conviction, well, not the criminal, sorry, the cannabis convictions that happened in Oakland, right? So their specific, like their entry and their priority, like permitting, has to go to people that got their convictions in Oakland. LA started to establish a framework as well, and with their criteria that they presented, it was California convictions for cannabis, and only cannabis, because it seems like that's where people are comfortable with, even though the war on drugs was like everything, you know, from like crack to like heroin, all these other stuff, and like as we've seen in just like the history of cannabis, it has been deprioritized, but it has been the #1 thing to get people caught up, because you can smell cannabis, so it becomes their probable cause in order to be able to get the arrest. And then they would throw out the cannabis since it has a low conviction, or like a low sentencing, because it had been deprioritized. And then they would charge for the higher narcotics. So you won't even see on some of the people's records that it says that even though they were engaged with because of cannabis, they had gotten like a narcotics offense. So we haven't gotten the language to switch over. San Francisco is nice because we were able to get them to include arrests that happened anywhere for the purpose of the reality of the cannabis industry and like in California, and how California actually produces 80% of America's cannabis supply. So how do you think it got there? And like, are we going to only write out the people that were bringing the money home, but you allowed people that stayed here and didn't take the risk to go get the funds to be able to get to get any priority? It didn't make any sense. So in order to be able to address that, and numerous other things as well, the fact that in San Francisco, in 2016, we still saw people of color getting arrested 7 times to 10 times more likely, depending on what your ethnicity was, even with it being deprioritized. So in order to be able to enter in, you have to qualify for one of the equity programs, and then be able to put together a solid business plan and acquire funding. So
And Proposition 64 does allow for expungements if you had more than an ounce or less than an ounce of cannabis, or had the sale or transport of cannabis of 28.5 grams or more, and you're over 18, it turns from a felony into a misdemeanor. And if you were under 18, it turns into an infraction. And those are also done automatically in 2 years, either from when you were convicted, arrested, or released from prison. And but you should also make sure that it is being done. As you know, you're responsible for your own due diligence with city and state governments. And for having 6 plants or more, 6 plants or less, those are also felonies that can be removed entirely, or also reduced to infractions or misdemeanors. Misdemeanors if you were above more than 21 years of age. And you can do this yourself. You can hire a lawyer, or there are also expungement clinics helping folks with that. And just to add to, LA also expanded their criteria to all of California. They actually did include language for other than cannabis, but you're barred from the industry for 5 years for a nonviolent offense, and then for a violent offense 10 years. And in San Francisco, there's also the Fair Chance Ordinance, which clears your record of more than 7 years and prevents employers from asking certain questions in regards to felonies.
And a very unique thing about
Conviction.
And a very unique thing, right, about San Francisco's equity program is that 30% of the workforce has to meet equity criteria. So in the event that people that do have convictions want to enter into the cannabis industry, not as a business owner, but as an employee, there's actually pathways to that, according to the equity program.
Off the top, can we name the cities in California that we can confirm that have equity programs?
Oakland, San Francisco, LA. Sacramento also has one on the table. I'm not sure that it's passed. And then going beyond that, Boston, Massachusetts, thinking of one. And oh yeah, literally the meeting happened yesterday.
Yeah, the meeting happened yesterday in Boston, and they do have an equity permit program now.
And Hartford, Connecticut too.
Davis, have you heard of Davis?
I heard rumors of Davis and Emeryville. And
Any more thoughts on this question? So the next question is probably going to be one of the heaviest ones. How should long-standing white cannabis business owners, primarily cultivation and manufacturing, interpret cannabis equity?
Okay. Well, how they should interpret it is definitely by Leslie's definition of the boxes. But really, what they should also do, Oakland, great example with the incubation program. Some of these huge manufacturers can take in eight people to incubate, although some of them are only doing 1 or 2. They should be taking 8. But they have built these really sophisticated systems of batch tracking, accounting, figuring out a lot of things that some small operators or others just haven't been able to figure out. They've grown to scale and gotten so big that they've been able to navigate these waters much more effectively, especially with money and buying power. And so I feel like a lot of these big manufacturers can take in and incubate people and not only give them space, but also mentor them and really kind of show them how to set up some of these systems that they've created just to guarantee these people's success. As Aaron stated earlier, most of these equity applicants that are coming in have zero business acumen. I've worked with a few different equity applicants. One of them didn't even have a computer. So when you're dealing with people that don't have these things that we take for granted as business people, you know, like this is a whole different ball game here, and they really have no idea about track and trace. Like, you can't offer these types of programs to these disadvantaged communities and expect them to succeed when they've had nothing this whole time. Like, okay, here's some space, figure it out. Like, no. We've got to do a lot of work and a lot of training to bring everyone up to speed and get them all on this same boxes that we're supposed to be on.
With San Francisco's equity process, we were only able to actually address one bullet point in the 4 pages of the recommendations that we were giving, right? So we only addressed licensure, but the rest of the recommendations had to do with the actual infrastructure to create a program that had staying power and that actually helped to address some root causes, mainly being education, right? Which is a big piece that can be filled. Like, we don't have a program at City College of San Francisco yet, so we're going to count on existing operators that have been in the business, like Amber was saying, then and had the time to figure it out, to help to educate, right, to become the mentors that we didn't have. So I think that we're going to see a very interesting landscape. This is the first time that you've seen big businesses, in order to be able to continue, big businesses, especially like a business owned by white males, having to actively reach out and become mentors for people that have been systematically disadvantaged. So I'm excited to see how it may bleed over into other industries and how people kind of take this new framework. But definitely as people to provide capital, right, and people to provide education about how to be compliant. So yeah.
Incubation is going to be key for the equity program to work. You have to give up. The equity applicant has to own 40% of business, which is good, but in San Francisco, okay, only in San Francisco, sorry, which is good, but it brings us back to the lack of skills and resources, and so there's not a lot of equity there to give up. So without incubation, it would kind of be pretty difficult for an equity applicant to be successful without these types of programs. Without the incubation piece, it would be extremely difficult. The capital, the space, all that. But like Nina said, really excited because now these big businesses are kind of forced. If they want an adult use license right now and they don't want to wait 2 years, they have to jump on this equity train. And in Oakland, I'm aware of a group that's incubating with 11 equity applicants. And a key piece that they brought up, which is to just piggyback what Aaron was saying, is that they realized that they had to create a mentorship program for the most part. They had the business training, and they're basically they created it, and they put them through a 3-month, and they're currently in it, I guess, the 3-month business training in order to get them up to speed on how to run these businesses that they're 50% owner and CEO of, in some cases, I'm sure. So it's exciting, and the incubation piece as it grows, is going to get really interesting on how, especially in San Francisco, it's a little more broad. So you can provide financing. You don't just have to provide space. You can provide mentorship, technical assistance, stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see what people program. You kind of have to come up with your own program. The existing MCDs have to do that right now to transition into adult use. They have to come up with their own equitable program of some sort based on the equity program. So it's going to be really cool to see what people come up with, and it's going to be, at least in San Francisco, it's going to be really broad. So we'll see what kind of groups pop up out of that. Hopefully, there's an equity group that starts to pop up that will externally outside of the city be providing funding for some of these equity applicants. Hopefully, funds start popping up and stuff like that. So and they're on their way too. So it's the equity program I'm pretty excited about.
Well, as the white male on the panel, I suppose I should touch on this, but no, I really think that, you know, 3 words: internship, apprenticeship, mentorship, are what's going to really allow this to work. But on top of that, you know, the equity program in San Francisco is really exciting. The incubator program is really exciting in the sense that, you know, equity, you know, it has to be a 40% equity owner, but the incubator is, I think you have to give 800 square feet of your space to an equity applicant, and that's really an incubator in the true sense of the word. But I think that there are going to be situations where that 800 or 1,000 square feet in San Francisco or Oakland respectively is given, but then that's it, and there's no mentorship, and there's no real teaching and training. And you know, one thing that I know myself and my business partners are really excited about is a new pool of people coming into the industry who are really excited about being in the industry. The longer that you've been in this, you know, the employee pool for quite some time has oftentimes just been people who we trust, who we know, people who didn't really have anything else to do, but they were, you know, a cousin's brother or something, and you can trust them. And because this was an illegal business, it was all about people that you could trust, not necessarily people who are passionate about the industry. And so the opportunity to incubate and mentor and apprentice people who are really excited about the industry, who want to be here and who want to be a part of this, I think that's sort of the two-way street in these relationships. That, you know, then it's not just doing it because it's mandated or because this is something that's required by law. It's doing it because we want to see the industry grow, and we want to see people who are passionate about the industry come into the industry and get excited about it. And we would be foolish not to try to nurture that and to help that grow. And so aside from the mandates, aside from the ordinances, people coming in with a passion and wanting to be a part of this, I think, is where a real sort of symbiotic relationship between the pre-existing business owners and the equity folks coming in excited, coming in passionate, coming in with a desire to learn. So it doesn't seem like it's something that was just put in by law. And then, you know, I was in the bar restaurant business for many years as well, and we have this format that we use often to motivate some of our best managers, and we call it sweat equity. And it's really interesting that equity is a part of that term, because it doesn't have anything to do with equity and what we're talking about. But basically what sweat equity is if you have a manager who's making a salary, call it $50,000 a year, and you really want to incentivize that manager to really run this business and make it their own. You say, well, our shareholders each individually spent $50,000 per share to own this business. And so if you make $50,000 a year and you work for 2 years, we're going to give you 2% of this business, or something to that effect. And basically what the sweat equity does is it gives that person a piece of the company as they learn, as they perform, as they move from this managerial position into it through sweat equity. Maybe they don't have the $100,000 to become a owner of the business right up front, but they can work that $100,000 off, and they can work through sweat. They can gain equity in the business on top of already what's mandated in the ordinances and so on and so forth. And I think these type of programs, it makes the equity applicant who's excited about the industry really feel like they're working towards something, and it makes the pre-existing owner feel like this isn't something that they were just forced to do. This is something that is helping them build their business and bring people into their business that are going to take it as their own and want to be a part of it and want to have equity in that space. And you know what? If in time they go off and do their own thing, more competition is better, it's robust, it's healthy. Any good business owner is going to recognize that. We're not trying to shut everybody out. And so I think there are just a variety of different ways that these programs can really be successful. And it's from both the pre-existing owners really recognizing and participating, and also the people coming in, showing that passion, showing that drive, showing that this is something that they really want to do. It's going to create a scenario in which these programs work, not because they're mandated, but because they're really what's best for everyone.
I'm also a fan of the incubator program. I'm glad that they all three of them have language that include real estate and technical assistance. And I would just add to that specific question, for them to leverage their influence in local politics and put pressure on city officials to really follow through on the technical assistance that is needed, and address any other shortcomings that they see to ensure that the incubator program is as successful as it can be.
Great. We talked a lot about, well, two of my takeaways right now from the panel is to get into the industry, top two things, your network and the capital that you can bring as two primary important things. So out of those two things, money or who you know, what would you say currently is more valuable getting started in the cannabis industry?
Who you know all day. I came into this industry broke as hell 4 years ago, and now I own my own company. I've been the COO of a dispensary. I've got all kinds of crazy experience. I know everybody in the industry. I can just hit up the top regulator, Lori Ajax, on the phone, like, who you know, all day long. You can come in there, not have any money in your pocket, but walk out super rich. Who you know.
I just got to keep throwing skill set in there too. Please, it's important. You got it, whether it's innate or learned. You gotta really have some know-how and some skills on top of who you know and the capital to make it in the long term.
Nina, I'm just going to repeat the question real quickly. So basically, I'm asking the panel to get into the cannabis industry today, right now. What would you value as being most important, money or who you know? And that's just
it's definitely who you have relationships with. Money, you can go ahead and throw around money, but like unless you have your network of people that are actually willing to sell you cannabis and to be able to trust you to hold product or to do like whatever, like you're not going to be in this business regardless if you have money or not. So like unless the industry trusts you because you're a good person or they know that they can get the money back from you, like you're not you don't even have to be a good person. I'm just kidding. You have to be a good person. But like just as long as they trust that you're gonna like make the business work, right? Because like they know you, right? They can vouch for you, you know. It's really important. And then yes, skill set, also very important.
I think the actual space, at least in San Francisco, I just recently heard that you don't have to have an actual space to apply for a license, which is really cool because finding a space in San Francisco, you have to have a location in order to apply. And so at least San Francisco specifically, outside of, I mean, you could have all the capital in the world, but finding a compliant space is extremely difficult. So that's a huge piece. I feel like is very important in moving forward with your business in general, is finding that compliant space and working from that foundation up. At least in San Francisco. Now in Oakland, it's a different story. You go after a license, you could raise it. Once you have that license, you could raise off that license. So that would be another way to go after capital. But yeah, I would just end with, outside of money and experience, I would say the actual space that you're looking for is at least in San Francisco specifically. It's very important.
And who you know becomes an important part of that.
Yes.
A lot of people find space through their network.
Yeah, through the network, for sure.
I just want.
No, I would just want to say that I have seen, however, some companies with capital who have creeped into the industry and become very successful. Defon's Chocolatier is one of them. Money is very powerful, and it may be because we haven't experienced it firsthand, but that's one of the big fears that I have in the future, that they will be able to just jump into this industry without knowing much about it or respecting it much, just because they have the capital and the right connections.
Yeah, you'll probably see that happening a lot, especially with all these new regulations coming in and people that don't have the money to pay for these regulatory fees. I mean, they're really insane. And so I see a lot of these smaller operators and even medium-sized operators being acquired by people that are not operators. So that'll be interesting to see. But one other thing that I wanted to add to what I was saying earlier about who you know is, I mean, you can't, it's not, obviously it's a game of who you know, but you have to, as Nina said, be a good person to back it up. And one of the ways that I found that I've been able to expand my network so quickly is by being helpful. If you're helpful and don't expect anything in return, you get everything in return. So I'm always down to help, give suggestions, whatever it is, help somebody, connect somebody, do whatever I got to do. And being helpful will always help you in the end.
Be on an equity path.
I think that's super important right now too, because it's still, I know it's growing, but it's still kind of a small group of people still, and so, like you said, we all kind of feed off each other. And I like I was saying earlier, I go to CGA meetings because I want to support growers, I want to support my vendors, and I want to find out what's going on with them, and just by doing that, I'm able to build those relationships for when I do get a retail store off the ground, I'll be able to work with those people and actually have good relationships and know who to work with, or at least know who I want to work with. And so it's still a very small community. So the piece of just like helping people right off the bat, it resonates a lot more now than maybe 10 years from now when there's all this big money in it and you're trying to break it into issues. Completely different story. We have this really cool right now kind of community that has over the past 3 months, at least in San Francisco, has really kind of come together, which has really been cool to see when we stood in front of the city hall for the last vote. It was really cool to see everybody and how calm we all were, which was really fun because everybody has these stigmas about cannabis, right? But then you go out there and you see the protesters across the street marching around and bullhorning, and then you saw us just holding, nice and quiet, holding the flag, just quietly conversing and very organized, and we have our leaders. So it was really cool for me to see how we kind of came together in groups organizing. And so that, just to piggyback on that, like, just being engaged and trying to help people in any way possible, and vice versa, is a key factor in initially entry level into cannabis.
And something to just remind people that money is something that's constructed by human beings and assigned value by human beings. Like, that is something that fluctuates, and you can create Bitcoins and all sorts of stuff and say, now this has value. However, relationships are very tangible. That's something that is never changing. That is something that will always matter. Is like, who's in your vicinity and who do you know that you can call and help? Like, that if you need help or if they need help, who can they trust, who can they count on? That is something that has value, that is priceless, that no dollar amount can ever amount to. So just really keeping that in mind always.
Build your personal capital.
Okay. I'll move on to our next question. So we've talked about using lawyers. What about other professionals that cannabis businesses are seeking out, are going to need to seek out? What are the ancillary businesses or regular market institutions that you're reaching out to help you with special interests, or not special interests, but special issues that every business eventually will run into. But in terms of the cannabis economy, maybe those people haven't flowered yet, or they're just now realizing that they can put their profession into the cannabis realm. Talk about that.
So my business, we're starting a distribution company, and we need an inventory control specialist. So you need people that are good with inventory. Cannabis deals with this weird 280E law, which is a tax law, and you basically cannot write off most of your cost of goods, them being cannabis. So learning how to navigate that space is really key. Learning the loopholes and the nuances and all that. So a tax attorney is helpful. Marketers, everybody needs marketers to help promote and strengthen your brand. CFOs, financial types. You need to find some type of a financial advisor or a financial analyst that can help you cut costs in certain areas. I know that when we took over Magnolia, we had a bunch of specials that were not very effective bringing in new patients. So we had a financial analyst come in and analyze all the specials and basically give us suggestions on new specials that we could do, which ended up saving us over $300,000 a year. So those types of things and those types of people are needed for really scaling your business and growing, and saving money. Because the margins, as Aaron mentioned earlier, are getting very, very, very slim. So finding all of those loopholes and everything that you can is key.
And I know we're not supposed to just talk about attorneys and think about other ancillary businesses, but now the attorney spectrum has become so broad. I mean, criminal attorneys, fortunately, we don't need as much anymore, but you need your business attorney, your compliance attorney. You definitely need a tax attorney or a certified public accountant in order to navigate all the complexities of the tax side. You're also going to need an intellectual property attorney. It's a big part of defending your brand, which is so important to build. And you're going to need, these aren't attorneys, but marketing folks like Amber said, and a branding company that will really help you. I mean, I'm one of the least creative people that I know. And yet we were able to build a great brand and some strong recognition because we hired a company, sat all of the owners and the employees down and put up a dream board and talked about what type of business we were trying to be and what we liked about San Francisco and spent days with us really developing that brand. And so once you get that and you have something that's recognizable and that you're going to start to build around, you have to protect it. Because the crazy thing about cannabis right now is we can't federally apply for copyrights. And so if there is a wine company called Gold Seal San Francisco or Gold Seal, but if there's a Gold Seal out in Vermont somewhere, they could start open up, be doing their thing for quite some time. And it wouldn't be until cannabis becomes legal throughout the entire country that we would start to have conflict. And it's going to be very important at that point that I have a strong hold on the intellectual property of my brand, my logo, all of these things. And so, that's something that's very important to consider as well. And, other ancillary things, I mean, there are just so many. You're going to need to reach out to folks who help you with your packaging. You're going, that's kind of the marketing and branding company, but you're going to need to find some way to source that way, make sure that it's child. If you are doing it, you're opening up a storefront or a cultivation site or a manufacturing site, you're going to require relationships with architects and
realtors.
And realtors. And so, I mean, the list of professional services really gets longer and longer, not to freak people out or make it sound daunting, but this is just why you need a great team.
And also a good network. My two best friends are lawyers. So don't think for one second that I do not ask them a bajillion questions.
Yeah, I was at a meeting at Meadow, I think like a week ago, with a bunch of different deliveries. It was the whole gauntlet of the regulations that were out: delivery, cultivation, distribution, all spread out. But I was talking to this guy that recently got hired at Meadow that was just there to build out compliance, and we started getting in a conversation about seed to sale. And after I talked to him, I was like, man, it's going to be really hard to be seed to sale compliant come, I believe, July when they start regulating it. That's going to be one of the biggest. From after talking to him, I realized, man, we're really going to have to get on top of this, to where just the tracking of your products alone. Like, for example, we can't give out free product anymore without tracking it. We can't necessarily give out free product. And all the products have to be packaged. I believe when they arrive, there's no, I correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure there's no loose flower that's allowed in the dispensary. So the experience that you have now is going to be completely different. All the products that come into that retail store are going to be prepackaged and ready to go. So you're not going to be able to have, buy a pound of this and a pound of that and put it in a jar and weigh it out individually right there. And all that, none of that's going to be in play anymore. Every little thing's going to have to be tracked. And like what Aaron was saying before with the bank accounts, with this compliance too, they're going to be on us pretty hard about this. And then on top of that, the taxes. So that compliance job, I think, is going to be a really broad kind of position, that's going to grow and be very important in the future for everyone. And then, it's good to see that Meadows building out is already on top of this and is building out a POS back end for everyone to get in on. That's going to be hopefully compliant in this new regulation. So, as far as like a job that isn't necessarily cannabis, it's the compliance position is, as far as I'm concerned, is going to be a huge position going forward. And then, advertising and marketing. In my space, I try to, especially in the community outreach, I try to explain, like, let's take the growing and the retail and the touching of the plant, put it over here to the side for a minute. And then let's look at all the social media that we need: Constant Contact, MailChimp, email campaigns, text campaigns, maintaining weed maps, Green Rush, whatever platform you on, your website platform, photography, descriptions, copy for the website, for description of the products. This all falls into branding and marketing too, but you can see how there's multiple jobs within that kind of, there's plenty of other things that don't just have to do with growing, that don't just have to do with opening a retail store, which kind of brings me back to the branding part. And it was mentioned again here that I feel like finding your brand initially is the best way to get started, because you can do a lot with a brand initially, and people, as money comes in, as things get more legal, as more states bring in cannabis, medical, or adult use, there's going to be more of that. People are going to want to find good brands that have good traction, with 5-star reviews. And I have a 4.9 on Weed Maps. That took a lot, and positioning on Weed Maps, it's a crapshoot. So a lot of that is going to play out, and those jobs are going to be just as important going forward, as growing, as just running a retail store, being a bud tender, and being knowledgeable. Those aspects that don't touch the plant are almost going to be more important to some degree, just to grow the business, especially with the markup that, like Amber was saying. We make good money on the cannabis, but it's starting to grow into this big market, and there's a lot of marketing people. The photographs initially were horrible. So you go on Weed Maps and it's like no photo. It's a kind of no description, so all that's not cool anymore. Like, you need to have good Yelp reviews. You need to have all this stuff now, outside of just growing weed and selling it, so.
And really, sorry. If you can help figure out the 280E tax thing, you will be everybody's hero. So lawyers, was needed. Now accountants, special awesome accountants. That is like the number one thing that all of these businesses will like love you forever for.
As the regulation gets defined, also environmental impacts are being taken more into consideration. And depending on what permit you're applying for, you have to worry about things like HVAC, air purification, water treatment, and water conservation, as well as food and health safety. Again, there's really very strict and specific regulations that will continue to apply to each permit.
Just a quick piece of advice that's hard learned. When you're a small business, you have a tendency to want to do everything yourself. And sometimes that's the only option that is available to you. And we've really learned over the years to focus on core competency. And if your core competency is being a delivery service operator, being that curator for that delivery service, that's what you need to focus on. You don't need to be trying to do your books. You don't need to be trying to figure out. You don't need to be the one who's trying to. If your core competency is cultivation, that's what you need to focus on. And so it may seem at the time that doing everything yourself is just the nature of the startup, so on and so forth, but you will spread yourself so thin that your core competency will suffer. And so try to find ways through your network. Heck, maybe your spouse or your mother or your aunt is a bookkeeper. Look to your network, lean heavily on the people that you have around you. Don't try to do it all yourself, because then you're going to do everything at 50% instead of one thing. And it's really crucial to starting small.
Bootstrap for this long.
Yeah.
Bootstrap as long as you can, and then scale up. Outsource so you can do other stuff.
Well, that ends the questions I have. I'd like to open up the remaining part of this panel to the audience. I will be taking audience questions. I will call on you and I will repeat your question. Is anyone in the audience have questions for the panelists? In the back? Yeah, in the way back, yes. Please. So we have over 50 people actually watching us right now online, and I'm going to just repeat all the questions so that the audience members everywhere can understand what we're talking about up here. So the first part of the question was, what is your favorite strain, cannabis strain? And the second one, what are the trends looking like in the cannabis market, i.e. concentrates, vape cartridges, trends that you see that were not mentioned? So we'll just kind of continue our flow the way that we've been going.
I'll speak up as the cultivator. Obviously, I'm going to pitch one of my own strains. OG Kush and Sour Diesel and the chems have been around for a long time. I'm a sativa lover myself, and I found a lot of kind of initial healing through sativas, and then I've really found that they're what helped me get through the day and help me still focus and not get that indica level high. So we at Gold Seal have a strain called the Red Congolese, and it's a pretty popular strain. It's been around for a while. It's a land race Afghani sativa. It is a pure sativa that has been bred expertly. It came over from Afghanistan, and if you have the right genetics of the Red Congolese, it's a sativa that actually produces, which is kind of rare.
Yeah.
It is a 12-week finishing strain, so a lot of cultivators stay very far away from it when you have strains that can finish in 8 weeks. But the Red Congo, when it's done properly and it's grown right, it can yield, and it produces one of the, I feel like, most aesthetic sativas. Oftentimes you sacrifice taste and smell for the effect of the sativa, and the Red Congolese really does not require any of that sacrifice.
Yeah.
Just to quickly answer that, I'm a big fan of the terpenes. There are about 5 different types of terpenes that are prominent in cannabis and in other herbs as well. I don't know how to say it. Linalool. Is my favorite. It's what's in lavender and a lot of indica strains. It helps with stress, anxiety, and is also sedative. So it helps you to sleep.
I suffer from lupus, so I try to stay high all the time. 'Cause I'm in a lot of pain, but I smoke weed all the time, and I'm not a big fan of sativas because they're a little too much. Like I don't even drink coffee. I don't do any caffeine whatsoever. I stay away from black tea, everything. So I'm a big fan of heavy indicas. So I love purples. I'm a big fan of the terps too. Always on the search for terps. So I'm super down with all the new hotness too. The purple punches, the mimosas, the strawberry bananas. All of those things. But anything indica dominant is pretty much in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Let's see. On that Congolese thing too, I'm a sativa diva myself, and definitely like a lot of the indica strains just make it very hard for me to get motivated for the rest of the day. I'm gonna end up wanting to just take a bath and like watch Netflix. But definitely, I have to say, I remember 3 years ago when Congolese started to hit the San Francisco market, and he's right, like Aaron was right, like. When you have the right genetics, it will yield well. But first off, when I got the gold seal one, I was like, oh my God, this is a real nug. Because like all the other producers that were doing it before, they had all these little small popcorn buds because they would produce this, like super larvae and like small. Plus we were having like a heat wave during that time period. So it was kind of like tough for a lot of the growers that were doing indoor. Lamb's Bread is my favorite sativa strain. It's super earthy, keeps me super grounded. It was also known as Bob Marley's favorite strain. Also a land race. When it's done right, it has like this kind of, people say it smells a little bit like savory or kind of like rancid. Feet, or sour cream or something. But like for me, when it's done right, it kind of has like a truffly quality to it. And then as far as like terps go, I enjoy the stimulus of like limonene, right? Citrine's a little bit too much for me, and limonene's a nice one. It's invigorating, it's stimulating. The ones that like the terps that are found in like Jack Herrera is like way too much for me, makes me mad paranoid, and I can't do it. And also same thing with pinene is not like my favorite. Like it goes to show that everybody's genetic makeup is very different, and the terpenes are things that you can find in aromatherapy. So even if you go get like something like doTERRA's like essential oils, you can start to study terpene profiles and how they react to the nervous system. And the thing is that's so magical about the cannabis plant that they actually produce the same terpenes that these other plants do. So it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, I'm an indica person. I smoke all day as well. I've been a heavy consumer since I was 18, so I've been selling weed since then. I would have to say currently Cherry OG and Candyland are kind of my favorites. As far as popularity, the OG and the true OG and the OG Kush and UK cheese is like a really, I like UK cheese. It's an economic too, but it's like one of the most popular on my delivery sites. I have a guy that'll buy anything cheese, concentrates, anything cheese. He'll buy it all. And then, the best way I think to explain that it was explained to me is when it comes to cannabis, so you have hundreds of receptors in your body, consider those locks, right? And so the amount of cannabinoid content, concentrates have a higher cannabinoid content overall. cannabis itself has a lot less overall cannabinoid content. And so consider the cannabinoid content's keys. And so when you consume those, they just go over receptors and kind of unlock stuff, right? And so when you get into the terpene profiles and you start diving deeper into the science, you can start to really see and learn what works best for you. But I would say that I love flower, so don't get me wrong when I say this, but flower is kind of becoming this old school thing, and concentrates as far as the age group in which what they purchase. The younger crowd is all dab culture almost. I've enticed a lot of flower purchase through basically giving out free eights for being a new patient and putting deals together. But I also noticed that they weren't buying flower and then getting the deal. They were buying a bunch of concentrates, a bunch of vape pens, and then getting the free eighth. And whether they smoked it themselves or not, or sold it to a friend, I'm not too sure. But concentrates seem to be, as of right now, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, as far as my opinion, is kind of the future at the moment. So
I would say microdosing is going to be huge, and you'll see that increasingly, especially with these new regulations that are
Amber,
coming forth.
What's microdosing?
So
It's
microdosing
like
would be
shrooms. Not just kidding. Just kidding.
taking baby hits, just taking little, consuming cannabis in small portions to get exactly what you need as far as the dose goes. So, that would.
Can you express methods of microdosing? What does
Sure. So, for instance, one of my products is infused cannabis popcorn, and you can eat one piece, and that's about 2 milligrams, or you can eat the whole bag, which is 50 milligrams. So, just eating small pieces and then gauging your effect and finding what your true dose is. So, not doing too much, not doing too little, just the right amount.
I would say topicals too, non-psychoactive cannabis products as well, CBD, not just CBD, but THC too. You can have non-psychoactive THC, it just means it's not decarboxylated. I don't know how to say that word either. And it has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties, antiseptic properties. So I'm particularly interested in the future of that field.
And Leslie, she's dead on about the topicals. It's such an easy shoe-in to gateway to cannabis. It's through topicals. Most people that are very reluctant to try cannabis will very much try a topical, and if it works, then they're ready to take the next step. So, topicals for sure, and especially with the diversity that's coming into topicals now. You got bath bombs, you got bath soaks, you got face masks, you got massage oil, you got all kinds of cool things coming out that people are just gonna want to try. So,
Yeah, I have to say, topicals also. It's could be one of the larger trends. At least in the realm of, let's say, like my cannabis yoga program, right? A lot of people are looking to be able to open up more space in their bodies where they feel a lot of resistance. And because cannabis topicals help to be like a local anesthetic and also help to bring down inflammation, you can actually achieve more body flexibility in using the cannabis topical before you start stretching. So it has been very useful for a lot of the people that are participating in my program.
I don't know, I'll just say real quick, it might be a little bit of a niche market, and it has yet to be proven because regulatorily, this is something that's going to take a year or two to kick in, if not longer, but the relationship between food and cannabis, and I know that there are a lot of restaurants who are really excited about being able to spice your salad or add cannabis into one of their primary dishes or host meals that are entirely around cannabis, and we haven't seen that yet, and what we've seen from the state in California and most of the localities is that that's going to be round 2 or 3 of regulations. Right now, that's pretty much off the table, but the relationship between and restaurants and cannabis is going to get interesting. And then even farther out, the relationship between infused alcoholic beverage and cannabis as well. I think that that's something that the state is going to push off for a while, but it's eventually going to come. And I think that could be a really cool line of products, infused beers, infused liquors, different that. A little ways out.
All right. Thank you. So the question revolves around environmental sustainability and cannabis, and how those two issues, one, affect each other, and two, how does that, what's the implication for equity communities in terms of environmental sustainability and the cannabis industry?
Well, there's CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, being integrated into cannabis regulation to deal with more of the large-scale impacts of cannabis. It hasn't been as similar to other environmental issues where in urban areas people of color are affected because cultivation happens in more rural areas. It kind of has been an environmental impact on wildlife. I think that energy efficiency is definitely going to continue to be a big part of this in the urban areas, especially because of indoor cultivation. And I'd imagine that the same type of programs like what is Title 22 will be implemented and applied to cannabis. And businesses that are being permitted know this and are going above and beyond what the state is requiring and are already kind of addressing issues because they are anticipating them.
I'm also a huge hemp advocate. So aside from just, like all the medical benefits and how the excitement that everybody has for the adult use market, more than anything, I'm really excited for the hemp market or like the development of hemp products. We probably won't see it in California. We'll probably see this more in other states because, like Florida, Kentucky has a huge program out there too. But they produce a CBD-rich hemp, but that crop alone can help to reduce our dependency on crude oil. It can create building material. There's like hemp concrete that's available that can actually thrive better in conditions that fluctuate in heat and in cold, right? Also, it can be used as fuel. Plastics, and another thing that's wonderful about hemp root is that it actually leaves the soil enriched, right? So whereas like a lot of other crops will drain a lot of the nutrients from the soil, like it allows the soil to be enriched for the next crop that comes in, which is not something that we see very often. So another thing that's pretty amazing is that in Chernobyl and in Fukushima, where they've seen huge radioactive disasters, they've actually started planting hemp in order to be able to clear some of the mineral, to absorb some of the impurities that are happening within the soil. So I'm hoping to see actually for San Francisco, and this is something that I started talking to Brandon about, but is that we have an issue in the Bayview around the shipyards that it is very toxic. So I'm hoping that maybe the cannabis industry might want to get on a campaign to plant hemp out there to see if it actually will help to clear the soil. Because as of right now, they've only said like, let's cap it. But if you just cap it with cement and then build housing on top of it, it still has some health issues that are happening within that district, who has the highest number of asthma and the highest rate of cancer in that district. So if we can even use some methods that have been used elsewhere to help to really have a long-term impact for that community, would be helpful. So I think hemp is is a very good way to go.
And I quickly just want to mention the role that zoning has on that. Cannabis is being limited mostly to industrial zoned areas, and some of those have already had these negative environmental impacts due to other industries.
East Oakland especially. There was a report that came out a couple of months ago saying that, so much lead is being found just in the soil around East Oakland. And this is where the green zones are. So.
And I'll just say real quick in regards to startup costs, and I think what part of your question comment was, there are technologies now that allow operators to be extraordinarily efficient. There's water reclamation inside of indoor space that pulls all of your condensate and all of your evaporate from your cooling systems and recycles all of your water. There's reverse osmosis that would allow you to actually take all of the runoff, recycle that water, and so that 80% of the water introduced into a facility would get reused over the period of a year. There are LED fixtures that are coming out now that are superior lights to many of the high pressure sodium lights that have been a staple of the industry, but that water reclamation is going to be, those systems cost 5 times the amount of your standard air conditioners, and the LED fixtures are, a typical high pressure sodium old school light is about $250, and an LED grow light is $2,200. And so it is possible to be significantly more efficient, but for significantly more capital outlay. And so hopefully in that respect, there are grants and subsidies and things for people coming in from the equity component, the equity side, so that they can be as sophisticated environmentally as well capitalized groups.
I'd like to add, the city of Richmond requires a 100% energy renewable plan when it comes to new cannabis businesses. So how do they achieve that? It sounds crazy. Well, the local power company has options for consumers to purchase 100% renewable energy that the plant collects through renewable energy sources. So that is a way in which cannabis, I think, is being seen at a local level and at a state level as a way to start creating new standards for, I think, not just for the cannabis industry, but for all manufacturing industries, and just using the cannabis industry because it's never been regulated. It's never been in the regular governmental fold. It's the perfect opportunity on a governmental sense to start with 100% renewable policies with this brand spanking new industry.
But again, those programs are more expensive. And so, not to just shoot that down or raise issues that I don't have a solution for, but I think to your point, how do we make these sustainable style businesses affordable to people coming into the industry? And ideally, again, grants, discounts, different things on a governmental level that allow people just coming into the industry from the equity space to participate in the 100% renewable programs without having to purchase the LED lights without, through some type of grants and subsidies. That type of thing. It's a great thing to keep high on the radar, because otherwise the well-capitalized groups will have all of this and they can tout that they're so friendly to the environment and their operations are green and all of this, and the equity folks are going to be left with the old gear and the stuff that really just does not paint that green picture.
Another question from the audience? Oh, sure. So I'll repeat the question. The first part of the question asks, I'm sorry, can you repeat the first question? Low barrier entry.
Yeah.
So basically, localities that have low barrier entries for the cannabis industry. And the second question? registering cannabis brokers at some point. Yeah. Yeah. So
Well,
panelists, go ahead, please.
Okay, so that for your first question, places that are basically a bit more cannabis friendly than others. So that's a lot of due diligence that you've got to do. You've basically got to check into is it banned in that locality, county, whatever it is, and then what's the tax rate? That's pretty much going to be what dictates how friendly the place is. Oakland's tax rate is 10%. Berkeley is 2.5%. Richmond, I believe, is 6%. So it varies throughout the Bay Area. San Francisco is 1%. So San Francisco. Yeah. So San Francisco, but then you've got different barriers in San Francisco, which would be real estate costs and property costs. Like it's right. Well, not just that, but Berkeley doesn't have very much space available. Berkeley is full. So it one thing that to change that, what we want to do is really not just advocate for more responsible tax, gross receipt tax that these cities are requiring, but also for them to expand the zones so that there is more real estate available and we're not getting price gouged so badly. And for your second question, that broker is now a distributor.
Everything.
It's licensed. Yeah, it's a license.
Super, super regulated to the point where you're going to be the person responsible for taxes, collecting the taxes,
and
testing, lab testing. Like a lot of responsibility now falls on the distributor.
Transporting as well.
Yeah, it's the most expensive license. And then maintain.
There are over 500 municipalities that want to do the due diligence, so there's a lot of value that's been applied to that as well.
With those 500 municipalities in the state of California that can have their own unique cannabis rules that follow state regulations, 80%, starting January 1st, 80% of localities in the state of California will have a complete ban on all cannabis commercial activity, including medical and adult use. This is the state's largest cash crop. So we have wrapped up our time. Thank you, everyone who showed up. Thank the panelists. Everyone, you did such a great job. I'd like to give a quick round of applause for everybody. Viewers at home, thank you for watching. Have a good night.
Thank you, Dominic.
Yeah.
Good job.
Dominic.
Thanks for
Dominic.
organizing it, man.
Good combo.
Congratulations on your law degree.
Passing the bar. I got my law degree.